Welcome, everyone. We are just before 10 o'clock. We will get started in just a few minutes. This is the League of Women Voters at the Pikes Peak Region, Colorado ballot issues. We're going to have Linnea Davey as our voter service team with us to discuss all of these wonderful things that, hopefully if you haven't turned in your ballot, you will be doing so shortly. But again, we will be getting started very shortly. It is 9:57. We're pretty prompt people. So starting at 10 o'clock again, welcome to you guys. As you're joining us in here, we're gonna, again, as League of Women Voters, we advocate, our main missions are education and advocacy, voter registration drives, voter information, voter education like this with Linnea as our voter service team chair. She is education is one of our big missions. So that is what we hope to do today and accomplish and help you fill out that ballot, whether you're sitting at home or you're going to go vote in person. Again, just kind of educating you, and we hope that maybe you will join us. We are a league, not just women. We do allow men as our members, so we'll kind of get into joining the league. But if you have any questions today, we would encourage you to go to lwvppr.org. That is our website. In the interest of time, right, as we go through this is a big election year, as you all are well aware. And with all the ballot issues, most of them we're going to cover today are state, but then of course we have some local ones that we will touch on at the end, but we'll include some links to our chat in our chat if there's something that you guys have questions on, but that's what we're going to be using for most of today. So welcome again. I got just another minute before we get started as we gather all of the attendees. This is a webinar, a little different than some of you that have been doing your Zoom meetings. You will only see a few of us. We have a production team in the back who are helping us out, and we couldn't do this today without them. So thank you, Julie and Diana, for being here and helping us out. So again, you are here with the League of Women Voters at the Pikes Peak Region. If you're just now joining us, we are here for your Colorado Ballot Issues 2020 talk. If you haven't turned in your ballot, that's what we're going to go through today with Linnea Davey. Again, we encourage you to use that chat box today with your questions. If we don't get to it, just keep on typing them in. There are a few of us monitoring that as league members. And again, we are a nonpartisan group, right? This is an education event today. We will we will not take any stances. We also ask for you today in our chat that you don't take any and advocate for one side or the other. This is again an education event for our voter service team. So we are here just to help you with those ballot talks, ballot issues. All right, Ms. Linnea, I have a 10 o'clock start time, right? It is right at 10 o'clock. Again, I'm going to kind of welcome everybody as they come in and we'll get started. We are going to use the chat box for our questions today. So my name is Shelley Roars. We thank you for being here today. I am your host. I am a League of Women Voter member of the Pikes Peak Region. I'm the co-spokesperson. Paulita Taverne is also our other spokesperson. So thank you for joining us today. We welcome you. We are doing this year's ballot information, which is kind of a COVID style way to do it, right? We are doing it a webinar. So we'll kind of get into the difference of that. But our two main missions for the League is education and advocacy. And since 1936, the League of Women Voters of Colorado has regularly published explanations and pro and con arguments on each of the ballot issues in every statewide election. It needs to be understood that the pro and con arguments published by the League are not opinions or endorsements of our League. Rather, they are arguments from the individuals and groups that support or oppose each of these issues. Our job is to educate you and help you and just give you this information, and you decide and make those opinions, study them, and then before casting your ballot, make your own opinion for yourself. This morning, we're going to cover the state ballot issues mostly, what they mean. We will try and touch on some of the local issues, but again, mostly state ballot issues, and the pro and con arguments for them. Additional information on ballot measures can be found in the Legislative Council's analysis, also known commonly as our Blue Book. This is what that looks like. Basically, you should have this. If you are an active registered voter, you should have your Blue Book. Sorry, my green screen isn't doing very well. There you go. I think you can see it now. That's what that looks like. This is mailed to all active registered households, and information about our judges can also be found in this Blue Book. So it's really important. And I know some of you are like, really? I've got to read that book. but we're going to help you maybe break it down a little bit easier for you today. So issues on the ballot are either two things: referendums or initiatives. The referendums have been referred to the voters by the Colorado legislature. In the case of referred statutory changes, the vote must pass by at least a majority of the members of each house of the Colorado General Assembly. In the case of constitutional amendments, it must pass by at least 2/3 of the members of each house. Regarding initiatives, since 1910, Coloradoans have had the right to place a citizens' initiative on the ballot. For a proposed ballot measure to make the ballot by petition, the signature requirement is 5% of the total votes cast in the last election for Secretary of State. For this year's ballot, petitioners needed over 124,000 signatures of registered Colorado voters. Most petitioning groups get substantially more signatures in order to qualify with the required number. So think of referendums and initiatives as how the question makes it onto the ballot. Then once they're on the ballot, ballot measures may be propositions, which change Colorado law. We reference the laws as statutes, and may be subsequently modified by legislative action or constitutional amendments, which are amendments to the Colorado Constitution. And they may only be changed by a later voter-approved constitutional amendment. You should be aware that ballot issues that change the Constitution are long-lasting and frequently impact the functioning of the General Assembly. So a note about constitutional amendments in particular. Again, we're kind of getting down and dirty and you're like, oh my gosh, it's Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, really? But these are just really important, and we hope that this information is breaking it down for you in a pretty easy way. But in 2016, voters approved a measure that constitutional measures that add language to the Constitution, they're required to receive a 55% of the vote to pass. And on our 2020 ballot this year, those measures that need 55% to pass are Amendment C and Amendment 76, which we'll get to in just a minute. Because Amendment B is a repeal of constitutional language, it needs only a simple majority to pass. Amendment 77 likewise only needs a simple majority of the vote because it moves certain language from the Constitution to the statutes. All propositions need only a simple majority to pass. Again, that changes to statutes. So as we get started, let's get some housekeeping on how things are going to go. I'm turning my phone on vibrate. Sorry, as your host, I don't want you to hear my phone, hopefully. In a webinar, which is what we are in today, rather than a Zoom meeting, you will only see the host, our production team, Juliet and Diana Love, that are league members, and our featured speaker, Linnea Davey, our voter service team chair. Given the volume of the ballot talk today, if you have a question, please go to your chat button at the bottom of your screen. Most of them will be at the bottom. If you can't, look around for it, but you want to click on your chat button, and then you're going to type in your question to the panelists. You can also choose panelists and attendees, whichever you want. League members are monitoring that chat for questions, and we will answer them as they come up. As this, again, is a voter service nonpartisan educational event, we ask the participants not advocate in the chat for one side or the other. Please keep this to questions only. The production team has the ability to turn off the chat if things go awry, but I know we can keep it to questions only. Yes? So let's get to our featured guest and welcome Linnea Davey, chair of the League's voter service team, to kick us off with Amendment B, repealing the Gallagher Amendment. Welcome, Linnea.
Thank you. Good morning. And good morning to all of you who are listening in. We are going to go over the amendments and propositions in the order that you see them on your ballot. And that's why it will start with Amendment B. Could we have Amendment B up? Thank you. Oh, there we go. This is a repeal of a previous amendment, which is commonly called the Gallagher Amendment. It was referred from the state legislature to do this repeal. Major provisions: it will repeal the constitutional provision that requires residential property tax assessment rates equal to 45% and non-residential property tax equal to 55% of the total share of state property taxes. It repeals a requirement that non-residential property tax assessment rate be fixed at 29%, and it repeals the requirement that the General Assembly adjust that assessment rate for residents in order to maintain that 45-55% ratio of residential to non-residential property taxes. So a little background. In 1982, the Gallagher Amendment was voted upon and approved by the voters in the state constitution in order to provide some property tax relief to residential property owners. The amendment required that the residential property taxes could make up no more than 45% of the state property tax base. Non-residential property owners are responsible for the remaining amount, which is 55% of the state property taxes. The Colorado General Assembly then is responsible for maintaining that ratio. When the proposal was adopted in 1982, the residential assessment rate was 21%. And because property values for residences have increased faster than business property values, the General Assembly has reduced the residential assessment rate over time in order to keep that 45-55 split. And today it is 7.15%, while the non-residential rate is still fixed at a constitutionally required 29%. Okay, and that's elsewhere. Okay, when the proposal was adopted, property taxes, let's see. If the Gallagher Amendment is not repealed, residential property tax assessment rates will be reduced again in 2021. Now, keep in mind that property taxes fund local public schools, fire and police departments, hospital districts, city and county governments, and other similar services. Property taxes are paid by homeowners and non-residential property owners like businesses, farmers, and oil and gas operators. Property taxes are paid by a property owner are dependent on three things. It can be the actual property value, the applicable assessment rate, and the tax rate, which is called the mill levy. Changes to any three of those components impacts the amount of property taxes paid and thus the amount of revenue collected by a local government. Now, originally they thought this would go up and down as the property values changed. But the Taxpayer Bill of Rights was enacted in '92, and that requires that voters approve all tax increases, and voters are often reluctant to approve those increases. Local governments no longer have the means to make up lost property tax revenue when property tax rates fall. If voters repeal the Gallagher Amendment in November, companion legislation, a state law, would take effect, and that would prevent the legislature from changing those property tax assessments for 4 years, and it would freeze the residential tax rates at 7.15% and the non-residential rates at 29%. This bill only takes effect if the voters statewide approve of the Gallagher Amendment. So a yes vote on this means you want to get rid or repeal the Gallagher Amendment. A no vote means you want to keep things the way they are, and the expected result is decreasing residential rate over time, which may result in automatic local mill levy increases in jurisdictions where they require that by law. Let's hear the pros and cons. Shelley? We lost Shelley.
Sorry about that. Sorry. So those in favor of repealing the Gallagher Amendment, correct? If you're voting yes, they say the Gallagher Amendment is an arbitrary formula governing property tax assessment rates. It uses statewide averages of real estate values that ignore the difference between urban and rural Colorado. Eliminating the required 45-55 split between residential and non-residential properties allows Colorado to develop future property tax assessments that are more effective, reflective of current property values. The Gallagher Amendment is doing more harm than good. This proposal eliminates the Gallagher Amendment so we can maintain the funding we need for critical services, such as local schools, fire departments, hospitals, emergency and water services. And those opposed to this, who oppose repealing Gallagher and want to keep it, basically they say the cost of living for Coloradans continue to increase. Under the Gallagher Amendment, residential property taxes will drop to 5.88% in 2021, but repealing the amendment will result in the tax rate remaining 7.15%, which is a higher rate for homeowners. Repealing Gallagher also leaves the door open for the legislature to increase property rates in the future in order to increase revenue. So those are your pros and your cons. Those are, if you vote yes, means repealing the section of the Colorado Constitution that set a fixed statewide ratio for residential and non-residential property tax revenue. If you vote no on Amendment B, this leaves constitutional provisions that are related to property taxes in place and maintains our current requirements for setting assessments used to calculate property taxes. So I just want to see if there are any questions regarding repealing the Gallagher Amendment from our attendees. If we don't have any other comments or questions, this is a big one, right? It's been around for a little bit. So we kind of want to give you guys just a moment. If you do have any questions on repealing Gallagher Amendment, Amendment B. Thank you, Linnea, for all that good information on that one. That one's kind of a hard one for me to understand. So being new to the area, I am definitely weighing that one. So, all right. So I don't see any questions currently on Amendment B. If we do get one as we move on to Amendment C, I'll kind of maybe go back to that one, Linnea, if that's okay. You have to kind of go back and forth. But as of right now, I don't have any. So we're going to go on to Amendment C, which is conduct charitable gaming activities. And this is one of those referred amendments that you mentioned that requires 55% of voter approval. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. Tell us about it, please.
Okay, let's get it up on the screen. Okay. This proposal asks voters to approve an amendment to the Constitution about the conduct of charitable gaming activities. These are bingo and raffles that nonprofit groups can engage in to raise funds for their organization. This major provisions, it would allow bingo raffle licensees to hire managers and operators of games of chance, and it would reduce the required period of existence for a charitable organization to obtain a bingo raffle license from 5 years to 3 years. Background: in 1958, the Colorado Constitution was amended to allow games of chance such as bingo and raffles. So it's been around for quite a long time. Currently, nonprofit organizations with bingo and raffle licenses are required to conduct those games only with volunteer members from that organization. Before a nonprofit organization can apply for a raffle or bingo license, it must have been in continuous existence for 5 years and then submit some other pertinent information and pay about $100 for a license. This proposal allows the hiring of a hired manager or operator, but allows that they be paid no more than the minimum wage. The proceeds of the game must be directed to the specific purposes of the nonprofit organization conducting the game. Ready for pros and cons, Shelley?
Shelley, please unmute.
I'll tell you, it's going to be a great day. Thank you. So, sorry, those in favor of Amendment C, conduct of charitable gaming, say this allows more opportunities for nonprofits to consider running bingo raffles as a revenue stream. It also allows compensation for volunteers, which in turn would help with the recruitment and retention of the people that work the game to support the nonprofit. And those against this Amendment C say paying workers takes away funds from the charitable organization due to overhead costs and reduces the amount of money a charitable organization can spend for its primary purpose. And removing the requirement that volunteers conduct the games, it more closely resembles for-profit gambling rather than charitable fundraising. So those are those in favor and those against. So a yes vote again on Amendment C allows nonprofit organizations operating in Colorado for 3 years to apply for a bingo raffle license, permits these games to be conducted by workers who are not members of the organization, and allows workers to receive compensation up to minimum wage. And a no vote on Amendment C maintains that the current requirements that nonprofit organizations must operate in Colorado for 5 years prior to applying for a bingo raffle license, and that workers must be unpaid volunteers who are members of the nonprofit organization. So that is Amendment C, the breakdown, the conduct of charitable gaming activities. Does anyone on our, in the attendees have any questions? We're monitoring that chat again. We are going through your blue book as of right now, which ones are on the ballot first. So if you're just now joining us, welcome. But again, please go to that chat box if you have any questions as we move on to Amendment 76 with Linnea, citizenship qualifications of electors, please.
This is a proposal from a citizen initiative to change certain language pertaining to voting in the Colorado Constitution. The language that you see here as an explanation is not on your ballot. So just be aware it's in the proposal. It's just not what you see on your ballot. They just on the ballot say, shall we require citizenship in Colorado for a voter? So the major provisions, it would change the language from every citizen to only a citizen of the United States. And it requires voters to be 18 years old. Now, as background, the eligibility requirements for voting in Colorado elections are stated in the Constitution and in state law. Under current law, a U.S. citizen who is 18 years of age, has lived in the state for 22 days before an election, and has registered to vote, may vote in all elections. While the Colorado Constitution guarantees the vote to every citizen, it does not prohibit extension of voting eligibility to persons under 18 years of age or to non-citizens, which is probably the direction of this particular amendment. Since 2019, a new state law allows 17-year-olds to vote in a primary election if they would be 18 by the time of the general election. It is unclear if this passes, if the measure, whether cities or towns with their own home rule charter would be able to establish their own criteria for voter eligibility. And ultimately, the courts may have to determine how the measure would be applied in home rule cities and towns. Back to you, Shelley, for pros and cons.
So proponents on this one say this proposal guarantees the Colorado Constitution will prevent future policies to allow non-citizens to vote. Voting is a fundamental right, and it will provide constitutional protections by specifying exclusively who can vote in Colorado. And I'm sorry, those against this say this proposal seeks to solve a problem that does not exist, as it proposes unnecessary and potentially controversial changes to language in the Colorado Constitution. It may create voter confusion regarding state and local elections and could discourage or disenfranchise voters, specifically disenfranchising 17-year-old voters. So that is, that is Amendment 76, Citizenship Qualifications of Electors. A yes vote will change constitutional language to specify that only U.S. citizens age 18 and older are eligible to participate in Colorado elections. And a no vote on Amendment 76 means the current constitutional language allowing every eligible US citizen to vote in Colorado elections will remain unchanged. So we will go to our attendees to see if there are any questions in our chat box. I have one question. Linnea, is there an underlying agenda for this amendment?
Actually, you have two questions, and I'd like to answer the first one first.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Does this stop illegals from voting is the first question. Thank you.
Yes. Illegals are not allowed to vote now. The first line that you have to fill out on any voter registration for Colorado is, are you a US citizen? And if you quote no, you cannot vote. What does it take to be a US citizen? You have to be born in the United States or its territories or possessions. Or you may be born abroad, but a parent who was a US citizen at the time of that person's birth makes you a citizen. Or you are naturalized, which is the process of which citizenship is granted to foreign citizens or nationals after meeting the requirements. It's a long process and it costs money to become, like, I think about $850 now to become a naturalized citizen in the US. So illegals are already stopped from voting.
Okay. And so then your next question is there an underlying agenda for this amendment? Somehow it seems restrictive.
Yeah, I don't know if there really is or not, but there is obviously concern about people who are not citizens being allowed to vote, but if that happens, it's been by mistake and not intentional in Colorado.
So the things are already there in place to prevent people that are illegal from voting, so we don't really necessarily have that problem, which is where the cons, those who are against this, are saying it's really looking to solve a problem that really doesn't exist. Is that kind of from what
and it's the county election clerks and the county clerks who are in charge of looking at the voters and seeing their registrations are legal, and so they're pretty diligent in Colorado.
So thank you. And thank you, attendees, for sending those questions in. Continue to send them in your chat box, if you would, please. We appreciate that. And we are moving on to Amendment 77, local voter approval of casino bet limits and games. And this one is also, again, I think, is this one the one that requires 55% of the vote to pass?
This one does require 55% because it's adding new language to the Constitution. This is a change to both the Colorado Constitution and to the revised statutes for Colorado concerning voter-approved changes to limit gaming in our three cities of Central City, Black Hawk, and Cripple Creek. It was initiated by the citizens through the, by petitions. The major provisions: it amends the Constitution to provide for local election in the towns of Central City, Black Hawk, and Cripple Creek to revise the limits that apply to gaming. And it authorized voters in those cities to increase the amount of a single bet limit above $100 and to approve additional casino games. And then it amends the state law regarding casino tax revenue to allow more flexibility in the community college programs. If this measure passes, casino bet limits and restrictions on the types of casino games will be removed from the Constitution and placed in statutes. The Colorado Gaming Commission will write the rules for any new games, and casinos may begin the new games and the new bet limits May 1st of 2021. Now, as a background, gaming was first allowed in 1990, slot machines and card games of blackjack and poker. In 2008, Colorado voters approved a change in the state constitution to allow bet limits of $100 on casino gambling in our three cities, Central City, Black Hawk, and Cripple Creek. They also approved adding the games of roulette and craps to those originally allowed in 1990. Under current law, 78% of tax revenues from gaming is distributed to the state's public community colleges, junior colleges, and local district colleges to supplement existing state funding for student financial aid and classroom instruction programs. This ballot initiative would expand uses of this revenue to include programs to improve student retention and degree completion programs. So it's adding some more areas in the current community colleges that can use the funds. Pros and cons, Shelley?
So proponents on this one say this proposal gives voters in Central City, Black Hawk, and Cripple Creek the right to approve a maximum single bet of any amount and add games, but not alter gaming laws. It gives residents in these three towns the option to hold a local election and decide whether to extend betting limits and games. The pandemic has hit these towns hard, and this proposal is an important step to start improving the economies in these towns that are built around tourism and gaming. And opponents argue that removing bet limits may result in increased financial problems and pathological addiction for some gamblers who could bet larger amounts of money. Increased gambling in these towns could lead to impacts on other nearby communities, but they don't have a vote in this matter, nor do they receive compensation to deal with these impacts. Gaming revenue for funding community college is an unstable source and is dependent upon economic conditions. So those are the pros and cons on this Amendment 77, local voter approval. We have any questions from our attendees, those who are tuning in with us today? Again, thank you for coming. So Linnea, on this one, can you confirm, is this for all state colleges? Do they all benefit?
It is written for community colleges, not all state colleges. So not the state universities. It is like in El Paso County, it's Pikes Peak Community College is a benefactor, but not University of Colorado at Colorado Springs.
Great. All right. So any other questions from attendees? We'll continue to monitor that chat box. If you're just now tuning in with us, please send those in. And I think that was our last amendment. Yes, we're moving on to propositions on the ballot. And tell me again the difference between a proposition and an amendment.
Amendments change the Constitution. Propositions change state law. Amendments take a further vote of the people to change again. Propositions can be changed in the state legislature.
Perfect. So thank you. So Proposition EE, moving on to taxes on nicotine products.
All right, this proposition, change to a state law, was proposed by the state legislature, which is why it has letters instead of numbers. This measure would gradually increase taxes on cigarettes from the current 84 cents a pack to $2.64 a pack by July of 2027. So it'll take 7 years to do that. And then it would also add a new tax on nicotine products such as vaping devices and e-cigarettes, also over the next 7 years. It authorizes the new tax revenue to be spent on expanded preschool programs, K-12 education, affordable housing, eviction, legal assistance, tobacco prevention, healthcare, and general state spending. Tobacco, as background, cigarettes, tobacco products such as cigars, chewing and smoking tobacco, and vaping products have different taxing structures in Colorado. Cigarettes are currently taxed in Colorado at the statutory rate of 20 cents per pack, or 1 cent a cigarette. And in 2004, Amendment 35 authorized an additional constitutional tax of 64 cents per pack, or 3.2% cents per cigarette, for a total state levied cigarette tax of 84 cents. So part of the tax comes from the law and part of it is from the Constitution. This amendment will only change the law part. Colorado currently taxes tobacco products, cigars, and tobacco designed to be chewed or smoked in a pipe at a statutory rate of 20% of the manufacturer's list price and a constitutional rate of 20% of the manufacturer's list price, for a total rate of 40% of the manufacturer's list price. This would incrementally raise the statutory tax rate to 42% by July of 2027 for new total tobacco products tax rate of 62% of the manufactured list price. So it'd be the 20% plus 42% equals 62%. Okay. While nicotine products such as e-cigarettes are currently not taxed in Colorado, this ballot measure would create a tax on nicotine products that would match other tobacco products tax rates. The rate would start at 30% of the manufactured list price in 2021 and gradually increase to that 62% of the manufacturer's list price in 2027. During the first 3 years after passage, funding would be directed to the general fund and primarily used for K-12 education, rural schools, affordable housing, and eviction legal assistance. Then after those first 3 years, the revenue would be dedicated to health and education programs, including expanded preschool programs, which would receive the primary funding, tobacco education, healthcare, and general state spending. The new revenue would be used to offer at least 10 hours per week of free preschool to every child in their final year before kindergarten, beginning in 2023-24 school year. So it comes in over 7 years, and during that 7-year period, it funds primarily different parts. The preschool comes in after 3 years, the K-12 education, affordable housing, eviction, legal assistance comes in at the beginning, and the tobacco prevention, healthcare, and general state spending are a small amount of the total. Ready for pros and cons?
So those in favor, they say the proposed cigarette, tobacco, and nicotine vaping taxes should reduce consumption of highly addictive and harmful products that cause cancer, heart, and lung disease. Colorado has one of the lowest taxes on tobacco and no tax on vaping products, while also having one of the nation's highest rates of nicotine vaping among youth. This measure would fund an innovative first in the nation approach to preschool, providing access for up to 10 hours a week of preschool at no cost during the last year before kindergarten would help working families. High quality preschool improves educational, health, and economic outcomes later in life. And those against this say that many smokers use vaping products as a way to quit using traditional cigarettes. Taxes on vaping products discourage smokers from quitting, and youth vaping should be addressed through enforcement of existing age restrictions and additional education and prevention. These are regressive taxes that disproportionately harm low-income users of cigarette, tobacco, and nicotine products. Because these products are addictive, users may continue to purchase them even after a tax increase. So a yes vote on Proposition EE increases taxes on cigarettes and other tobacco products and creates a new tax on nicotine products, including vaping products. The new tax revenue will be spent on education, housing, tobacco prevention, healthcare, and preschool. A no vote on Proposition EE means taxes on cigarettes and other tobacco products will stay the same, and there will be no new taxes on nicotine or vaping products. So I'm going to ask, I think we do have a question from our attendees, so I'll wait on mine. And Diana, or Lene, you may not know this, our production team is also kind of looking for it, but for people trying to quit smoking that use nicotine gum, would nicotine gum be taxed at the same increased rate, do you know?
I do not know for sure. I've been looking at the Blue Book since I saw the question, and all it says is nicotine products, including vaping. It doesn't spell out the rest of them, so it very well may be, but I do not know for sure.
All right, so we're going to put that one on one of those research questions for the league, and we will post again for things that we don't know. We will post on our league website at lwvppr.org a link to this recording for ballot issues, as well as some other information, hopefully to post to answer that question, whether nicotine gum will be taxed at that rate as well. So sorry. All right, so moving on, I don't see any other questions at this moment, but we may have another one. My question was specifically, Linnea, can we separate out the vaping products and just tax the vaping? This is just an all or one kind of vote, correct?
This is an all-in-one kind of vote. It's not separated out.
Okay.
That's how it was proposed by the legislature.
All right, thank you for that. All right, so I am going to be moving on, I think, yes?
Yes.
To proposition, what are we on?
113.
National popular vote, yay. All right, go ahead and give us the rundown on this.
Okay. This proposal seeks voter approval of previous legislation on the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. The legislature passed legislation to allow Colorado to become part of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact in the last legislative session, and this was petitioned on, hence the number, by the voters to see if people really want it. The major provisions, it amends the Colorado statutes to allow Colorado to enter into an agreement among states to elect the President of the United States by national popular vote, and it will take effect when states with enough electoral votes to form a majority, 270, have joined the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. As background, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is meant to assure that the presidential candidate with the most votes nationally will be elected president. States joining the compact agree to award all their electoral votes to the candidate who wins the national popular vote, regardless of the vote in their state. This ensures that the candidate who wins the most votes nationwide is also elected by the Electoral College, since a majority of the electoral votes will go to the winner of the national popular vote. Currently, voters across the United States vote for president and vice president as a ticket, with the total number of votes making up the popular vote. In December, following the presidential election, electors from the Electoral College vote for president and vice president. The Electoral College has 538 electors, the total number of senators and representatives in Congress from each state and the District of Columbia. The U.S. Constitution gives each state the power to appoint their electors. Colorado has 9 electors chosen by political parties. In order to win the presidency, a candidate must receive 270, 1/2, of the 538 Electoral College votes. Colorado, along with all other states except Nebraska and Maine, awards all of its electoral votes to the candidate who wins the state's popular vote. There have been 5 elections which have had different results between the popular vote and the Electoral College vote. The most recent ones, and we all know those, were in 2000 and 2016, and the remainder were in the 1800s. You may be interested to know that if no candidate receives a majority of the Electoral College votes, the House of Representatives chooses the president, while the Senate chooses the vice president. The last time this happened was in 1824. In the 2019 session, the Colorado General Assembly passed legislation to join the Interstate Compact. Voters in Colorado have the ability to petition to review legislative action, and this petition effort gathered sufficient signatures to place this question on this ballot this year. This proposal commits Colorado to award its electoral votes to the candidate for president who wins the largest share of the national popular vote. It will only take effect when states with enough electoral votes, 270, to form a majority have joined the compact. Currently, 15 states and the District of Columbia, with a total of 196 electoral votes, have joined the compact. Those numbers do include Colorado. This measure will have no impact on the 2020 election because they don't have enough people yet. A yes vote will retain Colorado's participation in the National Popular Vote Agreement. A no vote would remove Colorado from the National Popular Vote. I'm off to you, Shelley, for pros and cons.
All right. So proponents on this one say the national popular vote ensures one person equals one vote in every presidential election, no matter where the voter lives. National popular vote could encourage candidates to campaign in a way that addresses the concerns of all voters in all 50 states. The president represents the entire country and should be elected by the majority of all Americans. Every vote for president should be relevant and equal regardless of whether the person votes with the majority of that state or what size of state that person lives in. And opponents argue the national popular vote would move presidential election political power to big states and large metropolitan areas. The national popular vote would result in more polarized elections and less consensus building. Under the current system, candidates work to build the broadest coalition possible to win a majority of the Electoral College by competing for swing votes in swing states. This helps prevent extreme candidates from succeeding. This proposal would motivate candidates to energize turnouts in areas where they are strongest by making extreme promises. All right, so I've got a couple questions on this one from our attendees, Linnea. We'll get to those real quick. One is, I believe this would preclude a proportional distribution of electoral votes. Is that correct?
Well, if the compact passes and they get 270 electoral votes, that's how it would be. Proportional electoral college votes are only allowed in Nebraska and Maine. Colorado directs that all of its electoral college votes will go to whoever is the winner in Colorado, whether it's the same as the national or not. Does that answer the question?
Well, we'll ask the attendee, Dr. Henderson, and see if she posts another chat. I'm hoping it does. I think it did. Her follow-up response to that question is, wouldn't following Nebraska be a better idea?
Well, that
Again,
would be up to the voters of Colorado, and that is not part of this proposition. That would take a separate change.
Specifically, yes, ma'am. Gotcha. Okay. I think I understand that. I'm hoping that Dr. Henderson does as well. But all right. So another question on this one: shouldn't this be a U.S. constitutional change and not be made by individual states?
It is correct that this seems to be evading the Constitution and the Electoral College, and the only way to change the Electoral College at this point would be to have a constitutional amendment, which can be done in a couple of different ways, proposed by Congress and sent to the states for ratification is one method, and it is doubtful it would pass because the small states would not approve of it. And the other way is to hold a constitutional convention, which then opens up the entire Constitution for change, and many people are reluctant to do that. And so this is a way around it because it would allow states, and right now states are allowed to choose how they want to send their electoral votes, to decide that they would do it by agreeing their electoral votes will go to whoever wins the national popular vote. And so it is, in a sense, a way around it, but it is also the state's prerogative to do this.
Okay. So again, the amendment, it sounds like if we were to do a constitutional change, that would be very difficult. The process is much more difficult than this compact regarding the national popular vote. Is that what I understand?
Correct.
Great. All right, so I don't see any other questions on that one. I'm going to go back to one real quick though, regarding one of our attendees' question for the nicotine tax. We do not see anything that relates as of right now to a tax on the nicotine gum. If that changes, we will let you know. But as of right now, our production team, Diana and Julie, thank you so much, Diana, for checking on that for us, does not see anything on the tax for gum at this point. Okay. So moving on to Proposition 114, which is the reintroduction and management of gray wolves in Colorado. Linnea, go ahead and break it down for us.
Okay. This is an initiative proposal to amend the Colorado revised statutes to reintroduce and to manage gray wolves in Colorado. Major provisions. It would develop a plan to manage and reintroduce gray wolves to Colorado west of the Continental Divide by December 31st of 2023, and use state funds to assist livestock owners in preventing conflicts with gray wolves and to pay fair compensation for livestock loss. As a background, gray wolves inhabited the southern Rocky Mountains for years until 1945, when the last one was killed in southwestern Colorado. Wolves evolved alongside their prey, such as deer and elk. Bringing wolves back will help restore this predatory prey balance, keeping prey and landscape they graze on healthier. You might think there are a lot of deer in your neighborhood. Colorado is home to about 710,000 deer and elk, and roughly 3/4 of those deer and elk live west of the Continental Divide, and that's the main prey for wolves. There are presently about 2,000 wolves in the northern Rocky Mountain region and 4,000 in the western Great Lake regions. There have recently been confirmed sightings of gray wolves in Colorado, but it's unclear if it is a self-sustaining population, if they're coming and going. If this proposal is approved, the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission will hold statewide hearings about scientific, economic, and social considerations and include public input on updated plans. The commission would be responsible for wildlife management and regulation activities. They would work in conjunction with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife regarding any federal endangered species designation and would need federal approval prior to reintroduction of gray wolves. And I did read in the Blue Book that we are considered, Colorado is part of the endangered states, states that have endangered population of wolves at this time. And so the federal government is in charge of that program. But if that changes, that's when the state can take over. And there's some question about when that will happen. Pros and cons?
Yes, ma'am. So those in favor say this measure plans a reason. I'm reading questions and doing too many things at once. So those in favor say reducing wolves would go far to restore the natural balance to the Colorado Rocky Mountain wildlife for generations to come. This has been done in other states with successful recovery efforts. Those against this say the presence of wolves can cause conflict with humans and animals that live in Colorado. Gray wolves are known to prey on livestock, particularly when the deer populations are low in certain areas of the state. Since gray wolves from neighboring states have already been seen, it seems that wolves may be establishing their own presence, making this program unnecessary. So again, a yes vote on Proposition 114 means that the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission will develop a plan to reintroduce and manage gray wolves west of the Continental Divide. A no vote on Proposition 114 means that Colorado will not be required to reintroduce gray wolves. So let's see if there are any questions in our chat. Linnea, I think we have one. You answered this one already about, we're not sure if it's a sustaining group. Are the wolves currently living in Northwest Colorado gray wolves? We don't know if they're a sustaining population, correct?
Well, gray wolves are currently in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and they have statewide management authority for gray wolves. So my guess is, since we're close to Wyoming, that they've didn't recognize the boundary and were welcomed to Colorado. So,
Okay. All right. And then the second part of her question is, if not, what is the difference that would make introducing gray wolves more desirable than just allowing those already here to propagate?
the difference is who manages it. And this proposition would make the Colorado Fish and Wildlife be in charge of managing the system as opposed to the federal government. That's the big difference here. And as more wolves appear in Colorado, then they are not considered endangered, and therefore the federal government would be willing to let the state manage it. And evidently the people who propose this want that management system put in place now.
Okay. All right. All right. So moving on to our next one, Proposition 115, prohibitions on late-term abortions.
Okay, there we are. This measure is an initiated proposal to amend the Colorado statutes. Major provisions of it would prohibit abortion after 22 weeks of gestational age of the fetus. Then it would allow for an exception when the pregnant woman's life is physically threatened, but not by psychological or emotional conditions. And an abortion, rather than an expedited delivery of the living fetus, is immediately required to save the life of a pregnant woman. It would also provide for a criminal penalty for anyone who performs an illegal abortion, and suspend for 3 years the medical license of a physician who performs an illegal abortion. As background, current Colorado law allows abortion at any time during a pregnancy, or rather it doesn't deny it at any time, so it allows it. Prenatal screening for genetic and structural fetal abnormalities are typically completed before 22 weeks. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that a woman has the right to choose to have an abortion before the fetus is viable. Further regulation may come from the states and may regulate or prohibit abortions after fetal viability. State laws must contain exceptions for pregnancies that endanger the woman's life or health. This proposal defines abortion as any surgical or medical assisted procedure performed with the intent to terminate a pregnancy. A procedure is not an abortion if it is performed with the intent to save the life or preserve the health of the embryo or fetus, to remove a dead embryo or fetus caused by miscarriage, or to remove an embryo or fetus growing outside of the uterus. There are only 6 other states and 5 countries in the world that permit late abortions. Off to you, Shelley, for pros and cons.
Proponents on this one say this measure places a reasonable restriction on abortion after viability while still allowing a pregnant woman several months to make a choice about her pregnancy. It also provides an exception that allows an abortion after 22 weeks when necessary to save the life of the mother. In no case can a woman be criminalized or penalized for seeking an abortion if this measure passes, and it is a balanced approach with reasonable exceptions to a very personal issue. Opponents of Proposition 115 argue this one-size-fits-all measure would hurt real people going through unimaginably complicated personal situations. Decisions around pregnancy are best made by a woman and her family in consultation with her doctors and in accordance with her faith, not by politicians. And this proposal is an intentionally confusing initiative being pushed by many of the same politicians and groups who have repeatedly tried to ban abortion outright in Colorado. So a yes vote on Proposition 115 prohibits abortions in Colorado after 22 weeks gestational age, except when an abortion is immediately required to save the life of a pregnant woman. And a no vote on Proposition 115 means that abortion in Colorado continues to be legal at any time during the pregnancy. So questions in our chat, Linnea, is this a health or a social, is this a health or a social issue?
Oh, that's a good question, and I don't know how to answer that exactly because that would be the intent of the people who did the petitioning. I don't know. It looks like it restricts the health a little bit more because you can only have an abortion if it's a physical health that could threaten the life of the pregnant woman.
Right. And then the one that mentioned that you mentioned, right, it doesn't necessarily, let's say it was a rape or an incest thing, and I'm emotionally scarred. That doesn't necessarily mean I can get one after I've thought about this for 5-6 months and now I'm starting to freak out. That does not in the case of this.
No, that would not be included. So maybe it is more social and more restrictive on the health issue.
Okay. All right. So moving on, I believe our next one. Thank you again for all the great questions. Continue to put them in our chat box if you wouldn't mind. We are a little over halfway through, hopefully. But we are moving on to Proposition 116, our state income tax rate reduction.
This proposal is an initiated amendment to the revised statutes, which decreases the state income tax rate. It's currently 4.63%, and it would be reduced to 4.55% on federal taxable income of every individual and corporation beginning January 1st, 2021. As a background, in the mid-1980s, the state had a progressive tax system that changed to a flat 5% income tax for all taxpayers. The new income tax system resulted in large tax receipts for the state. And then beginning in 1992, through the initiated constitutional amendment TABOR, Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, these were diverted to Colorado taxpayers in the form of refunds. In the 2000s, the legislature lowered the rate to 4.63%. If Proposition 116 passes, the revenue to state government would be reduced to 5.55%, resulting in a drop of $154 million in fiscal year 21-22, or about 1.2% of the expected general fund revenue for that year. Any change in the TABOR amendment or any new tax levied by Colorado government must be approved by the vote of the people. State income tax collections are the main source of income for the general fund, which is the primary source for financing state government operations. Currently, most of the money in the general fund is spent on healthcare, education, human services, and other state programs. Shelley?
Yes, ma'am. So proponents on this one say this proposal reduces income taxes for all Colorado taxpayers. With so many people out of work and struggling financially from the hardships of the COVID-19 pandemic, Coloradans need to keep more of their hard-earned money. State revenue has risen every year for a decade, and this proposal would decrease state revenues by less than 0.5% of this year's budget. Opponents argue few taxpayers even benefit from this proposed tax cut. About 75% of taxpayers would receive less than $50 a year. Wealthy people with incomes over $500,000, which represents less than 2% of taxpayers, will receive over half of the total tax savings. Colorado's economy and its people have suffered from the COVID economic and health crisis in recent months. The cuts in revenue following a tax cut would add to the losses in education, transportation, healthcare, and other state services, reducing funds when more aid is needed. So a yes vote, let's get you on that one. A yes vote on Proposition 116 reduces the state income tax rate to 4.55% for tax year 2020 and future years. And a no vote on Proposition 116 keeps the state income tax rate unchanged at 4.63%. So that's a pretty basic one. I don't see any questions on that one. So we're going to speedily move on to Proposition 117, voter approval for certain fee-based enterprises. Linnea?
One sounds a little more complex, I think. This proposal is an initiated amendment to the Colorado Revised Statutes, which decreases, oops, sorry, I'm still on the wrong one. I'll get to the right one. This
Thanks for making me not feel so bad. So
Oh,
good.
good. This amendment amends the Colorado Revised Statutes to require voter approval for some fee-based enterprises. And the major provisions, it would require voter approval for state enterprises which have or are projected to have revenues of more than $100 million from fees in the first 5 fiscal years. And it combines the revenue collected for enterprises which are created simultaneously or within the preceding 5 years and serve the same purpose when they're calculating it. So you can't just split up your enterprises to try and avoid the $100 million collection. If it passes, the legislation will go into effect January 1st, 2021. It will impact only the enterprises authorized after that date. So it's dealing with new ones. As background, the Colorado Constitution defines a state enterprise as a government-owned business, which may issue bonds and receives less than 10% of its annual revenue from the state. It receives its revenue in return for providing a good or service. This definition was included in the 1992 Tabor Amendment. Since 1992, the number of state enterprises has risen from 6 to 22, and the amount of enterprises funds grew from $742 million in 93 to $17.9 billion in 2018. The enterprises range from Division of Wildlife, which was established in 1992, the higher education system of colleges and universities in the state, the Colorado Lottery, the Front Range Waste Diversion Enterprises, which started in 2019. All of these entities charge fees for services only from the persons, excuse me, using those services, and none of that revenue is treated as taxes, excuse me, as taxes that fund general services. These revenues do not count toward the Tabor revenue limit. Excuse me.
Want me to take over? You're
Yes.
good? Yes, ma'am. All right, so many counties and municipalities in Colorado also operate enterprises. This proposal does not affect any of them. It requires voter approval of any new enterprise that is projected to receive fee revenue of more than $100 million in its first 5 years. This estimate is calculated by legislative fiscal personnel. If an enterprise is not projected to receive that amount, but does actually receive funds in the first 5 years in excess of $100 million, it has to get voter approval. After the first 5 years, it will not have to go to the ballot. If more than one enterprise is created, which serves essentially the same person, all of their funds will be added together to measure the 100 million for the 100 million voting threshold, which is what you mentioned. Yes, Linnea? That's where the combining.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so proponents on this one say, fees are growing exponentially and this revenue falls outside of Tabor limitations. Use of enterprise fees is just a way to get around the taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which is at Tabor. To make legislators accountable, this money should be made subject to oversight. Voting on fees puts the power in the people's hands. These fees are no different than taxes and should undergo voter approval. Opponents argue that enterprise rules were approved under Tabor and are now operating now as they were intended. The enterprise fees makes those who use the services provided pay for them, not all taxpayers. All right. Again, this is kind of one of those that people are like, but either way, it's a good one. Please know what you're voting for and educate yourself. So we appreciate your questions in our chat box. I don't see any on that one just yet. Anything on before we move on to Proposition 118, Linnea?
Yes, if people want to see what current enterprises are that in the past, if this had been elected earlier, would have required voter approval. It will tell you, and it's on page 51 of your blue book. So that's a good place to look to see who's in there. It includes all the higher education colleges, universities, the Colorado Healthcare Affordability and Sustainability Enterprise, the lottery, unemployment insurance, parks and wildlife, correction industries, and the petroleum storage tank fund are the biggies.
All right, so again, a yes vote on Proposition 117 requires voter approval for new state government enterprises with fee revenue over 100 million in the first 5 years. And a no vote on Proposition 117 retains the state legislature's authority to create new enterprises as under current law. All right, so moving on to Proposition 118, we've got the Paid Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program.
Correct. This is an amendment to the Colorado statutes to create a new statewide, state-run paid family and medical leave insurance program. It would create a statewide paid insurance program and division. It would provide a partial wage replacement for up to 12 weeks a year for eligible employees taking time off for medical reasons or to provide care to family members. And it would require the premium payments to be split between employers and employees. Currently, both federal and state leave requirements apply to Colorado businesses. The Federal Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993 allows eligible employees to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave per year for specified circumstances. A new state law enacted in 2020 and effective for employers with 16 or more employees on January 1st, 2021, and all employers on January 1st, 2022, requires them to provide 1 hour of paid sick leave to each employee for every 30 hours worked up to a maximum of 48 hours, which is equivalent to 5 days of work per year. In addition, Colorado law permits an eligible employee to take up to 3 days of leave, paid or unpaid, in any 12-month period if certain conditions are met, which is on page 55 of your blue book. This proposal, if passed, creates a new paid family and medical leave insurance program. Employees qualify to participate in the program if the employee has worked for his current employer for at least 180 days, which is about 6 months. Self-employed individuals can opt in or out of the program. Qualifying employees will receive a portion of their regular weekly pay up to the max of $1,100 per week for up to 12 weeks per year. Benefits are payable for an additional 4 weeks, 16 weeks total, to eligible individuals with serious health condition related to pregnancy or childbirth complications. Benefits are paid on bi-weekly basis. Qualifying conditions covered by the program include the individual's own serious health condition, caring for a newborn child, an adopted child, or a child placed through foster care for the first year, caring for a family member with a serious health condition, circumstances related to a family member's active military duty, and individuals' need for safe leave due to domestic abuse, sexual assault, or abuse and stalking. And that last one is nowhere else described in either the federal or current Colorado statute. So that's a new one about leave for domestic abuse, sexual assault, or abuse and stalking. Premiums are collected through payroll deductions, and the employer is required to remit the employer and employee contributions to the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Division within the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. Employer and employee premium payments will begin on January 1st, 2023, and the premiums are evenly split between the employer and the employee. The initial premium amount is equal to 0.90% of the employee's wages in the program's first 2 years. Adjustments may be made to the premium amounts. Beginning in 2025, those premium amounts will be set at an amount necessary to obtain the total amount of premium contributions equal to 135% of the prior year's claims and 100% of the cost of the program administration. So you see, it takes a little bit of time to find out how many people will use it and how much money it will take, and to get enough contributions to pay for that. Premiums may not exceed 1 2/10% of an employee's wages. Employers who already have an approved private family and medical leave plan are not required to pay premiums, provided the private plans give the same benefits and protections to their employees. There are some individuals and organizations that are not required to pay the entire premium. These include employers who have 9 or fewer employers, but are required to withhold and forward the employee's portion of the premium. Not required are self-employed individuals, local governments that say no to participating in the program, and employers that offer these paid leave benefits already. Employees taking leave are protected against discrimination. I'm not talking right anymore. Employees are taking leave are protected against discrimination and retaliatory measures by the employer, and upon return to work must be restored to the position held by the employee when the leave started, or be restored to an equivalent position with equivalent pay, benefits, and other terms and conditions of employment. Off to you now.
Proponents on this one say nearly everyone is going to need to take time to care for themselves, a newborn baby, a seriously ill family member at some point. But today, only 1 in 5 Colorado workers has access to paid family medical leave, and those that need it the most are least likely to have it. This proposal would make sure that 2.6 million hardworking Coloradans can put their families first without having to risk losing their job. It also protects small businesses by allowing them to offer paid leave to their employees without having to pay for it, helping them compete with large corporations who can afford to offer this type of a benefit. Opponents argue that Proposition 118 is a $1.3 billion tax increase that requires employees to pay into a program that they may never benefit from using. Employees are already faced with job uncertainty in the current economy and cannot afford to lose part of their salary or other benefits. If the demand for the benefit is higher than expected, employees will be expected to contribute an even larger percentage of wages in the future or sacrifice other workplace gains. This measure creates a new and expensive bureaucracy with almost 200 employees, a director that is a political appointee and has little accountability. With so many unmet needs in Colorado, like teacher pay and transportation, this is a program that we cannot afford. So a yes vote on Proposition 118 means the state will create an insurance program to provide paid family and medical leave benefits to eligible employees in Colorado, funded by premiums paid by employers and employees. And there are those people that are excluded from that, right? We went into all those exclusions. And a no vote on Proposition 118 means the state will not create a paid family and medical leave insurance program. So that is your breakdown on Proposition 118. Yes? All right. From my notes, I believe that is all I have on our state ballot issues, Linnea, correct? We're going to kind of briefly run over some local ballot issues.
Yes, and for people who are not in the Pikes Peak region, you may or may not want to stay on. I find it interesting to see what the local governments are proposing. Vote 411 is a League of Women Voters website that you may go to find out information about the ballot issues and also candidates that are up for office. And you're welcome to go to that.
And I think that Vote 411 is awesome because you just specifically choose where you're at, and it is very fine-tuned to where I am at. So that, it's really cool.
Your ballot will be different than mine.
True. So from a local, we do have some resources. I think we're going to come back to that one, but from a local ballot issue perspective, I think the first one we want to discuss is the City of Colorado Springs issue 2A, amending the city charter. Is that correct?
Yeah, once we get there. All right. This was put on by the city council, and it would amend the city charter to allow the city to retain and spend up to $1,900,000 above the 2019 spending limits, with excess revenues to be spent on public safety, rather than having to return it to the voters. And it would allow future growth to be based on the year 2019. Revenue is down in 2020, and in order to follow the laws of Tabor, if we had the spending limit based on 2020, it would take, well, the last times that this has happened, it's taken up to 5 years to recover to the level that it was in the year before the downturn. So this would allow the city to basically de-Tabor or not refund excess revenues from what was projected in 2020.
Okay, so on these, Linnea, just so everyone knows, we are not in the Blue Book anymore. We are now in this awesome little thing, right? If you can see
El Paso
that.
County. Yes, however, some ballot issues are not in there.
Because they
Like
don't.
because that El Paso County flyer that came out about the ballot issues is only for Tabor related ballot issues.
Right, and 2A is one of those.
And 2A is one of those.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We also have two competing ballot issues regarding parklands and what happens to them if they want to be sold, traded, given away in any form. 2B was proposed by a coalition group, and it would amend the city charter. It would allow, in the language that you have on your ballot, it says the conveyance of city-owned parkland. And that means it can be either sold or traded, or sometimes people have donated land to the park. It's permitted, but that will take, first of all, a referral by a supermajority of the council members, 7 out of the 9 council members, who then refer it to a vote of the people, and that sale must be approved by a majority of voters at a general or a special election. For the city of Colorado Springs, this would be similar this year to a special election for them, because their general elections are in April, but because it's on the ballot at another general election, it is not as costly. Okay. Amendment C was proposed by the city council as another alternative of a way to convey parklands, and this one would be permitted by approval of a supermajority of city council members, and that would be it. No vote of the people here. Okay. Both measures, because they are similar languages. In fact, when I really wanted to talk about this, because when I looked at my ballot, I found it very confusing. And if you look very closely in about the 3rd or 4th line down on Amendment 2B, it will have the language "and vote of the electorate." If you look at 2C, you will not see those words there. Okay. It does say something about votes by a majority. Well, there are some parklands that were either donated to the city, like the Palmer deeded parklands, and those that have been purchased by the organization TOPS that already have protection for those parks built into their proposal. This is for the other parks that are not included.
All right, we've only got just about 10 minutes left, Linnea, so just
If
FYI.
both of these are approved by the voters, the one with the most yes votes will become effective. So I suggest to voters that they choose either the one 2B to be parkland sold by the voters, or 2C by the supermajority of the council, and vote no on the opposite one. Thank you. The next one are some other school district 11, which is Colorado Springs area, will allow the school district to collect, retain, and spend all its revenues, including grants and other revenues that come to it. And it will no longer have to refund excess revenues to the voters. Next. Some other issues you may see: Palmer Lake is asking to publish its legal notices on its website rather than in a newspaper. Monument has two issues: a sales tax increase of 0.5%, and they want to change the date of their city elections from April to November. Other issues. Next. Miami Yoder School District is wanting to allow its elected school directors to serve unlimited terms. The two fire districts are asking for monies. Donald Westcott District wants to adjust their mill levies in case the Gallagher Amendment B is approved. And Calhan Fire Protection District is asking for mill levy to add fire people and equipment. And Teller County has a fire protection district that is asking to set tax rates so it can keep its current staffing and service level. And notice Cripple Creek is trying to pass a law that would expand the gaming types and bet limits, which would go into effect if the gaming amendment to the Constitution is approved. And that's the local issues that we have in our region.
It's a lot going on.
Yes.
And it's a lot to research as a voter. So we encourage you. We've put up a link in our chat. There is a link to the Blue Book. Thank you, Diana, for that. There's an English version and a Spanish version. So if you need either one of those, that will get you there. But this basically wraps up our conversation and our 2020 ballot presentation, COVID style. We thank you for being with us today and taking the time to research these issues. We know it's kind of a dry topic, and there's a lot going on. So we do appreciate that. And we thank you, Linnea, for helping break it all down. We're going to kind of go over some resources real quick with regards to some important dates. So you have those in front of you. Thanks, Julie, for getting those up. Basically some resources that we want you to give you first. Number one is, if you want to check your voter registration or go to check your information, go to govotecolorado.gov. Linnea mentioned that vote411.org. That is the league's portal for candidate information issues. You literally just put in your location and it brings you up. Know your judge. You might not know about this one, but also on your ballot is a lot of judges. So if you don't get your information from that Blue Book or another place, go to knowyourjudge.com and get some more information, because it's a really good source. And then, of course, our local El Paso County Clerk and Recorder, epcvotes.com. Another wealth of information. They give you, if you haven't registered to vote, what you need to register, where you can, gives you a lot more information there. Also gives you a list of El Paso County voter service and polling centers and those drop box locations. I was literally at the Citadel Mall, and there is a voter service center right there in the mall that starts opening up on Monday. So go to epcvotes.com for more of that information. Some important reminders. Every registered voter will receive a ballot in the mail. You do not need to request this. It will automatically come. For those who still need to register for the first time, you can register for up to 8 days prior to the election. You can go to govotecolorado.gov. If you do any time after that, including election day, you need to go to the county clerk's office or a voter service center in your county to register. But Colorado, you can register to vote the day of election day. So we encourage you to do that. Again, just kind of different. You can't go to govotecolorado.gov. Just go to your county clerk or a voter service center in your county. Specifically, those are your voter qualifications. Again, this is on your EPC votes, Go Vote Colorado, but be a citizen of the United States, be a resident of Colorado, all that kind of good stuff. Again, I encourage you to go there. We kind of want to make sure, one misconception here on this one, we want to, voter suppression is one of those things that we try to educate people of. If you are not serving a sentence for a felony, and you're a parolee, you are eligible to vote in the state of Colorado. So please go and register to vote. Don't think that just because somebody in South Carolina says, oh, you're, serving your, you're a parolee for a felony, you can't vote. That is not true in Colorado. So please go and register to vote. Voter service and polling centers will be available in every counter in the state. Sorry. Ballots were mailed beginning October 9th, so I know I've already received mine. If you haven't received yours, you can return your ballot by mail. They do ask that you mail it by October 26th. You can put it in a drop box, one of the voter service and polling centers, any of those places you can and drop it off. But all ballots must be received by Tuesday, November 3rd at 7 p.m. If you put it in the mail on November 2nd, they're not going to receive it by November 3rd at 7 p.m. So it is please drop it off after October 26th. Okay. So
I just wanted to let you know that as of yesterday, 436,000 ballots have been received in Colorado, compared to the last presidential election at this time, it was about 12,000 ballots received.
Wow, that's impressive.
Isn't that impressive? Hooray for all of you voters.
That is exactly. Hooray. And thank you for being here, voters, as well. But again, remember, all your ballots are due by Tuesday, November 3rd at 7 p.m. Go to one of those wonderful links. If you are interested, again, we are the League of Women Voters of the Pikes Peak region. We are here for education and advocacy for voters. If you're interested in becoming a member of our league, and remember, it's not just women, we do have men members. We encourage you to go and visit our website at lwvppr.org. You can call us at 719-447-9400. And our wonderful production team, again, thank you. They put that website up. LWVPPR.org is our website. Call us at 447-9400, or you can email us at lwvppr@gmail.com. Thank you again for being here today. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you, Linnea, Julie, and Diana, and the League of Women Voters at the Pikes Peak region. And thank you for voting. See you next time. Thanks, everybody. You did great. Whoop, whoop. Yay for us. I hope I got that on the recording.